Welcome back to the Culture Exchange podcast. Today we want to unpack how we form opinions about people before they even say a word, whether it's because of their nationality, gender, age, or the way they look. And to dive into this topic, we are joined by Kristina Roppelt to talk about bias or implicit bias, unconscious bias, whatever is the term, and how bias actually shapes our perceptions.
Kristina is an intercultural communication and soft skills consultant with 10 years of global business experience. She has lived, worked, and traveled to over 60 countries and currently lives in Denmark. Kristina provides intercultural consultations, workshops, research, and business support for individuals and corporate clients. And she is the author of the book, 50 Intercultural Questions. Kristina, welcome to our show. We are so happy to have you as our guest today. Welcome.
Thank you so much. The pleasure is all mine.
So great having you, Kristina. We have already mentioned how we all carry certain assumptions without realizing it, but the concept of unconscious bias can sometimes feel like a big abstract thing. So before we actually dive deeper, just to make sure we are all on the same page, I'd love to hear your take, Kristina. How do you personally define unconscious bias?
Yeah, absolutely. May I answer your question with yet another question?
Okay.
If I tell you, can you imagine an apple? Would you be able to describe to me what you visualize?
Well, it depends. Yeah, it starts already. Yeah, like the shape, yes, but color
Probably
and everything.
we
Yeah,
might have different descriptions,
Yeah.
like Marie-Christine and
Yeah.
myself, right?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yes. But the experiment was conducted in the US, and it turned
Mhm.
out that an absolute majority of the respondents visualize a round-shaped red apple by
Mhm.
default. Even
Mhm.
though they might come in different shapes, they might come in different colors, different sorts.
Right.
And the unconscious bias is exactly this kind of association about not vegetables or fruits, but about groups of people. And they
Mm.
are not fully understood by us unless we are specifically being asked about that. And even then, sometimes we don't recognize them. And of course, they are ultimately negative because even if sometimes we have a positive assumption about some group of people, let's say all the Indians are good in IT or all the Russians are good in ballet, that
Mhm.
implicitly means that we are discriminating against the other groups of people who might be equally good or even better in IT or in ballet. So
Yeah.
basically, these are our unrecognized, unconscious associations about certain groups of people, as you've said, nationality, ethnic groups, gender, professional background, etc.,
Mm.
etc. They're ultimately negative and far more widespread than the conscious prejudices or stereotypes that we have and we can verbalize.
Yeah, so bias is such a big piece of intercultural understanding and something most of us are not even aware we're carrying. So I'm curious first, do you think bias naturally shows up when people from different countries or cultures interact? And building on that, where do you personally draw the line between cultural difference and assumptions or misunderstandings?
That's an amazing question, and I think it takes a whole big lecture to
Oh,
explore with a lot of interactive exercises. But what I would probably start with would be that we actually have those unconscious biases regarding the other groups of people, even when we don't interact interculturally. So even if we don't work in a big international company, or even if we don't travel abroad, the unconscious bias is something that is being shaped in us from the very, very first days of our childhood, mostly by the surrounding that we have in the family, plus
Mm.
very heavily it's shaped in media.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
even when we just hear somebody's name, Frauke has
Mhm.
started with the fact that we might have some assumptions about people by the way they look, or by their religion, or by
Mm.
their ethnic group. But in fact, even by hearing somebody's name or
Yeah.
seeing somebody's appearance, we already might have some unrecognized thought that, oh,
Sure.
I would
Yeah.
rather not have a meeting with this person, or I would rather not like to travel to that place, or I would rather not have an interaction with these group of people. So basically speaking, biases are all all around us, and the cognitive biases in general, not only the ones related to specific groups of people. And this is something, as I love to say, as a metaphor, we cannot and we can never eliminate completely. It's like the bacteria growing on our teeth. All we can do is brush teeth twice a day, or sometimes even more if necessary, and make sure we check on ourselves again and again. So when it comes to the differentiation between the unconscious bias and the cultural awareness or the cultural differences, the basic draw line lies in the recognition. So usually when it comes to cultural awareness, it's all about awareness. It's about understanding how we define people's differences. And if we are proper intercultural communicators, then we definitely rely on scientific sources, some statistically proven facts. Whilst unconscious bias is usually something irrational, something based on our unrecognized experiences from the past. Just to give you an example, if you want to go to a business trip to India, an unconscious bias would be, I feel something might go wrong. I'm not sure if I really want to meet the Indian business partners. Maybe I should just meet my compatriots in India. That would be so much easier. A cultural understanding would be that, well, statistics tells me that in India, for example, people perceive time differently than in Germany. So, being culturally aware of that and being proved by statistics, I can organize my business trip with extra buffers. That would give me a chance to mitigate potential challenges, but I'm not assuming all the Indians are doing according to the statistics. The cultural stereotype would be that all the Indians are late. And this is something people would usually verbalize. A disclaimer, we don't approve of that stereotype. And of course, every person is an individual.
You just mentioned this awareness and recognition of unconscious bias. And I think we often underestimate our own biases because we like to see ourselves as being fair and objective, of course. And we usually judge ourselves by our intentions, like I'm not racist, I'm not sexist, I must be unbiased. But as you just mentioned, a lot of our biases work in the background, so shaped by culture, by media, how we grew up. So we are not even aware that there exist, right? So, and actually, just on a personal note, I did this Harvard implicit association test, and it was such a shocker for me because I genuinely thought I had no gender bias at all. And then the results suggested otherwise. And that was kind of uncomfortable for me and also eye-opening because it showed me that you can consciously believe in equality and still carry unconscious associations that influence how you think. So why do you think we often underestimate our own biases?
I think it's a bias by itself. We think we are good people. No, seriously. That's what we would call a double blind spot. So most people are unaware of our unconscious biases, but even when told and explicitly shown that they have this bias, for example, by this Harvard implicit association test, people usually reject that and said there must be something wrong with the test, or the questions are related to the American culture, so I must take a different test because it's so heavily culturally shaped, etc., etc. So we usually, it's very hard for us to accept that the bias is actually there, just like with every single person around us. I have never seen a person without biases, and I myself also am a product of biases. The only difference would be step one, do we recognize them? Do we start working on recognizing them? Second, do we actively start working on eliminating them on a regular basis? And number three, do we explore other people's cultures? Do we explore other genders' positions? Do we explore other ethnicities, preferences, etc., etc.? Do we broaden our horizons actively to start seeing contrasting examples? And by that, also eliminating the biases inside us. And again, to our listeners from democratic countries, I can give yet another good metaphor. As you probably know, no democracy is set in stone. And you can see and hear a lot of examples these days about presumably democratic countries that are suffering from, let's say, the corrosion of certain democratic institutions, if we put it softly. So the idea here is that it's never democracy forever, because we as people have a tendency to grab on the power we have and stick to it. And the abundance of power usually erodes the personality. So it's the same thing with biases. Our brain functions in a fashion that wants us to stay together with the people like us. Our brain functions in the way that biologically we prefer sticking to the ones who are exactly like us.
Yeah.
So you need to actively work to tackle this very basic desire. Same as with democracy. You need to keep working on improving your democratic institutions, because nothing is set in stone. Democracy requires a lot of actionable work, and as well as overcoming biases requires a lot of work.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So we rarely notice our own biases. That's exactly why it matters. Kristina, I want to talk a little bit more about your personal experience with bias. You've spoken before about the invisible bias, yeah? You've experienced because of your Russian background. How has that shaped the way people perceived you in international settings?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I do believe that for our specific case, for my specific case, it is a question of ethnicity and nationality. But for the listeners who will be following us, I would like to suggest that they also try to think of the other personal examples they have in mind, maybe about gender, maybe about corporate background, maybe about religion. So I do have to confess that these days, having a Russian passport and having a Russian language as a mother language, and having a lot of my professional experience back in Russia is a bit of a challenge. And even though, again, as you have mentioned, many people would say, "Oh, I'm not having any problems or issues with people of this or that background, people of this and that passport," the fact is, there is a lot of internal stress and internal discomfort being caused sometimes by the fact that somebody Russian is in the room, or somebody Russian is doing business with you. Nevertheless, to tell you the truth, regardless of the political situation, that be after 2022 or before that, being Russian has sometimes been associated with not the most pleasant categories. And in my personal experience, that has mostly manifested itself when not I was doing business, but mostly when I was going on vacations. And interestingly enough, if you go to certain countries, that be Egypt or Turkey, it is a very heavy statistical reference for the local people to see that a lot of my compatriots didn't speak English, consumed a lot of alcohol, maybe behaved in a little bit very, I would say, open manner. And whenever they saw a person who spoke the same language, their immediate reaction would be to expect the exact same, starting from, "Oh, wow, you speak such a good English. The Russians never speak good English," up to, "Wow, you don't want to drink alcohol? Why?" So all of these reactions, I'm sure, again, if you ask a person, "Do you think this and that about the Russians?" they would probably say, "Oh, no, I don't think all the Russians are the same." But the very first intuitive response would be something like that. And it was genuinely uncomfortable, so uncomfortable that at some point, my husband and I, we've just decided to stop speaking Russian at the resort. We
Okay.
switched to English, and the whole world changed to us. So everybody
Okay.
changed their attitude. Nobody ever asked about our language capacity, about our background. Nobody tried to flirt with me, and nobody tried to suggest that we have alcohol for dinner. Um, Funny enough, this is something that goes far beyond their work in an international background. It goes far beyond studying abroad. It goes far beyond your commercial activities abroad. Even if you just go on vacation, this is something that we face, and I'm sure our listeners will be able to come up with their own examples.
Yes, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite remarkable. I mean, how stereotypes actually follow people across borders, right? So when your identity becomes a label, you must constantly manage. And so Was there like a specific moment when you realized people were reacting not to you, but what you represent in that case, and when you basically felt reduced to a stereotype?
Hmm. Right. I think if we talk about my international experience and the association with my passport, the example that I've just given would be the
Mm-hmm.
most striking. However, let's for a change take another angle and maybe talk about gender perceptions.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly never felt that I have ever been discriminated against as a woman, as a professional entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
And even though there was some uh, strange situations when I noticed a man would behave a little bit differently with me than with their male partners, I still honestly thought and felt that I've never been discriminated against on the basis of my gender until I actually faced a couple of situations when I was catching myself on the gender biases, as we
Mm-hmm.
spoke about the implicit associations test.
Yes,
I
yes.
had two situations in my team when my colleagues got pregnant, and unfortunately, it wasn't, I would say, very professionally managed in terms of our work obligations, because
Mm-hmm.
both of them promised to deliver certain things and it never happened.
Mm-hmm.
So, after two cases of my pregnant colleagues, I had a feeling that
Okay.
I subconsciously become very alert when I get an application to a
Mm-hmm.
new position in my company from a young woman.
Mm-hmm.
And being a young woman myself who was planning to have a baby one day, I was appalled and shocked to recognize that even I, as a person from the very same group, from the very same collective of people, have this association about the younger ladies of my age. It was appalling, and I understand that this is something we should be consciously working on,
Mm-hmm.
regardless, even if we ourselves
Mm-hmm.
find ourselves as a part of the discriminated community. So it goes without saying that your gender, your appearance, your language sometimes speak louder than your merit, your professional characteristics, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
etc. And our brain just tries to save energy, not to deal with every specific application and consider the potential collaboration with this expert. Our brain just tries to come to the conclusion as quickly as possible and not waste time on the category of the people that the brain thinks is not reliable.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. The gender across cultures. Yeah. So one aspect that often shifts across cultures is how gender is really perceived in professional environments, specifically. Yes. And as a woman working internationally, you have experienced basically gender bias differing across countries and regions. Yeah. I noticed that myself, that it can show up very differently depending on where you are. Like I lived in Asia, now here in Germany. Can you share another experience, gender bias differing across countries or regions from your experience?
Yeah. And again, I would give you an example here that probably doesn't come from a man, but rather comes from women themselves. So, whenever I train my clients before their business trips, say to India or to China, one of the most frequently asked questions I'm receiving from the audience, from the female audience, is what should we do in order to be accepted as professional partners when we go there? And I can blame women for raising this question and for asking because they are worried and they have unconscious and conscious stereotypes about how they might be perceived. So, one of the funny moments is that a lot of foreign women, specifically European, American, and post Soviet, worry about being discriminated when they go to China or to India to a higher extent compared to how they're actually treated in these countries. The
Mm-hmm.
funny moment is a lot of Chinese people, Indian people, Middle Easterners are so much used to having European and American and post-Soviet women coming in very professional roles, leading delegations, being the ones who are responsible for this or that matter. Whilst it's the European, American, and the post-Soviet women who worry and sometimes cause more tension and stress about that. Without doubt, of course, leadership styles for females would differ from country to country. And my position here is that um, before we even consider a certain style to be discriminative against women, I welcome both females and males to explore how the locals see the leadership opportunities for women before rushing to conclusion. Exactly one of the recommendations that we give about unconscious biases before rushing to conclusion. Why don't you just take a deep breath and explore the actual evidence before making a final decision?
Interesting.
I just read that there's like a recognized catalog of cognitive biases that list over 180 to more than 200 individual
200.
types, right?
Yeah.
Of biases that interfere with how we perceive reality. So that's quite a long list. How do you navigate conversations actually when people project their stereotypes or their assumptions onto you?
Maybe most simple and low-hanging fruits, if you allow me to say so, was the conversation when somebody comes up front to you and verbalizes something that is unpleasant. So, for example, I've had my clients saying, as a woman, I've always been asked to write down comments at the meeting on the whiteboard because women all have nice calligraphic skills. Another person told me, as a young professional, I was always assumed to be the most junior in the team, while in fact I was far not the most junior in terms of my position.
Yeah.
Or one professional of Chinese origin once shared with me that he was automatically perceived to be very reserved and too shy, and was always upfront told to be more proactive in the conversation before the conversation even started.
Yeah, right.
So, one of the easiest ways to, let's say, bring awareness of your interlocutor to that field is by kindly and carefully suggesting a simple phrase. You can say, well, not all women are the same. Or, well, not all Russians are the same. Well, not all lawyers are the same. And I think it's very, very important the tonality that you're using here. You may say that with a lot of anger and frustration, and I understand where they can come from. A lot of us can, I would say. But the fact is that, again, it's very hard to blame people for what the brain is trying to, by default, set up on.
That's it.
So,
Yeah.
being kind to your partner, colleague, new interlocutor, and
Yeah.
expressing kindness and awareness at the same time is
Mm.
something that is fantastically well has been working, at least for me and for my clients. Apart from
Mm.
that, I would suggest that there's a fantastic tool called bias journaling.
Mm-hmm.
And bias journaling is something that you can do when you're not quite sure about the biases that you carry on a regular basis. Every time when you find yourself in a situation of making judgment about another person
Mm-hmm.
before they represented their actual opinion,
Yeah.
actual
Yeah.
behavior, etc.,
Yeah.
I suggest that you write that down in a special
Very good.
notepad or paper or something. For instance, I can share my own experience. I've caught myself at a very unusual place on the biases mode. I was clearly experiencing unconscious bias when I was approving and accepting or disapproving and not accepting invites on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. Good examples. Yeah.
Okay.
What you can
Yeah,
see
yeah.
is usually the name,
I can
the
relate
photo,
actually. Yes.
And sometimes you can also see the city or the country.
Yes, yes.
Those three categories usually tell us nothing
Yeah.
about the person's
Yeah.
professional capacity, their professional network, or something like that. You
Mm-hmm.
can also find yourself at the position of a reverse preference. Say, for example,
Mm-hmm.
I know when women would be consciously accepting more women simply because they believe they need to support women, etc., while unconsciously, again, discriminating against male profiles. And I know there's been this
Mm-hmm.
fantastic discussion about male versus female profiles on LinkedIn and the algorithms. I'm not going to go deeper into that.
Okay, yeah.
I'm not a professional in
Yes.
algorithms,
But
but
that's a topic right now. Mm-hmm.
give it a look and you will recognize that you choose where to sit in a bus
Mm-hmm.
based on the appearance of the people. You
Mm-hmm.
choose whom to collaborate with on your big team with project mates, whom to approach for advice. You will
Mm-hmm.
decide on where to stand in line in a cafeteria or in a grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
Even such small daily routine activities may be showing you where your bias lies.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
surprisingly, if you take a closer look, you will discover a lot of hidden dark sides of your brain.
So interesting.
Yeah. I'm not sure if we want to do that, but yeah, I totally agree. I mean, that's a good actually task to do that. And I'm quite sure we find a lot of these 200 biases probably. Yeah.
We'll be happy to attach a link to this code. It's
Yes.
pretty nicely done. One of the um, infographics that I think is really very illustrative. Unfortunately, there is no one single catalog accepted across the
Mm-hmm.
academic community,
Mm-hmm.
but this one is a good attempt, so I highly recommend to give it a
Yeah.
look.
So let's talk about bias in intercultural teams and global workplaces because you're also a consultant and
That's
you
my favorite
are
part.
supporting right teams in that context. So in your perspective in international teams, do certain nationalities, do certain cultures tend to be perceived at least as more credible, as more authoritative, or whatever it is? So, do you also experience the stereotypes there and the prejudices?
Absolutely. And you will not be surprised to hear that it all depends on the specific country where the team is located, on the
Mm-hmm.
specific culture that the leadership might come from, on the specific generation. Say, let's take an example. I'm here in Armenia right now, where I'm
Mm.
for both business and personal purposes. And while we are recording this in the afternoon, in the morning, I've had a couple of meetings with the local professionals. And it's fantastic how the generational
Mm.
factor also switches on when it comes to, let's say, reliable nations. So for the Armenians who were born in the Soviet Union, the Russians would be a very reliable nation. While for the ones who are, let's say, 30 and younger, you
Mm.
would see a big trust in the Americans. So even
Okay.
within one specific country, in different contexts, with just
Mm.
one factor such as generation, you
Mm.
will see a certain majority of people trusting this or that national culture,
Mhm.
even maybe sometimes not understanding that. Uh, for instance, in the Russian culture, you would have a lot of ethnic groups,
Yeah.
and not all the Russians are ethnically Russian, including myself. I'm not ethnically Russian. So, funny enough, when it comes to, let's say, a Chinese based team, they might believe that certain Asian countries are much
Mm.
more reliable and trustable than the others. While
Yeah.
if you take a step back and, for instance, come to the Middle East, you might see that a lot of Asians are just put into the Asian category altogether and not even
Mhm.
differentiated between. So I would say, as always, it's very, very contextual and
Mhm.
depending on the seat of the headquarters, the location of a specific team, the leadership of the specific team, the generation, the professional area. In all of these situations, people would have biases against certain national professional, gender, and other backgrounds. So we cannot universally say that all over the world, the Germans are seen as the most reliable, whilst XYZ are seen as the most unreliable. Um, it's very, very individual, including the experience of people, again, from their childhood. With the teams of intercultural teams, when I work on the topic of unconscious biases, I usually start with a little warm-up exercise when I ask people in a very interactive format to share their experience of whether they were raised in a city where they were exposed to different races, whether they have had their parents working with people across different generations, whether they have ever worked cross-functionally in their corporate experience, whether they have started studying a foreign language at a certain age when they were a child. Have they traveled abroad before they were 12, etc. So lots of different factors come in, and with this, a big chemical reaction shape a certain perception that then it's my job to break down and help people to step back and try to look at the person's professional capacity before jumping to conclusions.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That connects closely to another layer, what you mentioned already, the power in global teams. It's the language, right? How do you see language, especially being a native or non-native English speaker, shaping power dynamics in international settings? That's also interesting, huh?
That's a whole big topic, which I wish we could discuss in more details. And I'll be super happy to also share several resources when it comes to research of how native and non-native speakers are being perceived. And again, going back to my example, among the things that come first, no matter whether I travel for business or for personal reasons, it's usually factor number one that people say, "Oh, your English is so good.
Yeah.
You must be a wrong Russian." So usually the whole dynamic changes just because with language and the way people pronounce words and the way the clarity of the English comes, usually people make the conclusion of whether you're well educated or not, whether you're professional enough or not, whether you have strong soft skills or not. And in so many other instances, it influences, again, very subconsciously, the way people perceive you at the workplace and beyond. And this is extremely relevant for the mixed teams where we have some of the native speakers and non-native speakers working together in the same language. So, for instance, you have let's say, my example, one of the clients I'm working with is Europe slash American slash Central Asian team. And they all speak English as their common language. And there you clearly have the Americans and some of the Anglophone countries of Europe having let's say, a benefit score just because this is the native language, and they don't need to put extra effort in being, understood or in being extra clear. My take on that when I work with mixed teams like this is that the language understanding is always about a two-path road. It's never just the non-native speakers who should take a step to sound better or be more understandable. It's a huge work that can be done on the side of the native speakers as well to adjust and be understandable. Because sometimes we hear people speaking too fast, using too many idioms, not being very clear in their cultural context, etc., etc., etc. So the other thing is that is happening also in connection to language is when suddenly in a team you start having certain bubbles or clusters. There's another client of mine with a headquarters in Amsterdam, where suddenly they had a very big Italian community shaping a bubble. Then there was a Russian-speaking community from the post-Soviet countries. Then there were French-speaking community with the people from all over le monde de la francophonie, so the French-speaking world. So, and suddenly you see that people tend to shape informal connections within those bubbles. And no matter what their lingua franca, what their common language is, suddenly you prefer a collaborator who speaks literally your language. So language is a very powerful thing because it lies on the surface. If we take this renowned cultural iceberg model, I'm sure you have touched upon it in your podcasts no less than a dozen times. In this iceberg, you'll clearly see language among the very visible part.
Mm.
So because it's so easy for our brain to catch up on that and
Mm.
start stereotyping based on it, we very clearly and easily catch it and make our assumptions
Mm.
about the person's professional and
Yeah.
educational background based on that.
Yeah, it seems there's a lot going on in the corporate setting as well, right? So just listening to you. But do you think that global companies are actually aware of all these dynamics? And
I would say it depends on the company.
do they support the employees as well?
Um, I would say that I could probably classify the companies that at least I've been working with into three categories. Some only come
Mhm.
for support when it's clearly a red zone already, when they have
Yeah.
intercultural conflict, or
Okay.
when they clearly see that the common language isn't working, or when they, make some statistics in the end of the year and they suddenly see that they only hired um,
Right.
white males 45 plus, no matter what the
Okay.
position was, and they didn't even have diversity among the applicants. So
Mm.
they probably positioned their vacancy in a specific fashion. Uh, Nevertheless, these are the companies that already found themselves in big trouble, either because
Mm.
the employees were complaining, the HRs were complaining, or maybe even the board of directors or the investors were complaining
Yeah.
because they clearly saw some evidence of a problem going on.
Mm.
Then there is the second level of companies which somehow feel that there could be improvements. There is no emergency situation and no troubleshooting needed at the moment. And I would say it's the majority of companies, they are falling into this maturity category. They really want to improve. They really want to make it better. They really want to unbias themselves, specifically the recruitment process. But they know certain things can be improved. Maybe some of the things they see, some of them they don't. And
Yeah.
finally, the most mature clients, it's very interesting to also work with them, even though it seems that most of the things are settled. They have very nice. Structured interviews, blind recruitment, a lot of
Mm.
additional unbiasing practices, and a great diversity in the teams, professional trainings for the team members. These teams are, of course, a little bit ahead than everybody else, and they recognize a lot of their blind spots already.
Mm.
Usually, a professional HR or HRBP who has had certain training in unconscious bias and intercultural communication comes and brings this awareness to the team. But they're in minority. So I can say some of the companies are fantastically good in that, and it's a pleasure to work with them because it doesn't request a bit of an educational work on my side before the contract is signed. But still, there is always
Mm.
room for improvement, no matter how balanced your policy is inside the company or inside the team.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. Thanks for sharing. I notice this a lot in international environments. Even when companies try to be culturally aware, old assumptions still slip in. Yeah. Share with us another or a situation maybe you came across where someone was judged too quickly because of a cultural stereotype.
Oh yeah, 100%. Let's say we've had a situation with one of my clients when that was pre-Christmas time. And the headquarters of the company was in America. So in the US, the default scenario was to wish everybody Merry Christmas.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Well,
without going
holiday.
further
Yeah.
into holidays and celebrations and stuff like that, there was this situation when there was a new employee coming. His name was Mohammed, and an American employee named, uh, let's call him John, doesn't matter, for the sake of anonymity, talked to his fellow American employee, Mohammed. So they both came from the US, they both spoke the same language. And the dialogue was something like Mohammed coming and saying, Merry Christmas, John, whilst John in reply said, um, see you on Monday. So the fun moment here is that just based on the name, that
Mm.
Mohammed sounded like a Muslim name, and statistically it certainly is.
Mm.
John assumed that Muhammad does not celebrate Christmas. And instead of saying, hey, do you celebrate Christmas?
Yeah.
Or should I congratulate you? What's your take on Christmas? They made an assumption that they don't celebrate Christmas just because of their name. They must be Muslim. So I'm not going to uh, be in an uncomfortable situation congratulating them on Christmas. And again, he could have said, Happy holidays to you, have a great end of the year, lots of different options. There was this awkward pose, and Mohammed was kind of
Yeah,
lost and didn't
exactly.
know what to do, whether this person didn't want to interact with them, or
Yes,
what was the
yes.
problem? Let's put it this way.
Yeah.
So I think it's a beautifully put example.
But
I've
also, I
had
wanted to add, I mean, Frauke, you lived in the US, right? Normally, actually, it's more common to say happy
Happy
holidays.
holidays. Yeah, that's
yeah.
what I learned there,
Yeah, so
actually.
it's
That was
Merry Christmas
my
even
take.
for us,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, when we travel, it's not a common. Normally, it's happy holidays.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
But may I
The first
also
thing I
suggest,
realized
yeah.
yeah,
I had to learn.
m-
Yeah.
yeah, Marie-Christine, may I also realize that the funny thing is, um, it's for us, for you and me and Frauke, that we assume that it's the most typical type of greeting in the holiday season. But
Mm.
if we step a little bit beyond our professional bubble, for an
Mm.
absolute majority of people, it's still Merry Christmas
Okay.
because they were raised with that, because they were born
Yeah.
with that, and
Okay.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
that's the environment, that's their village speaking this way,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
For us, for the professionals in the intercultural sphere, for the professionals in international companies, that has become a norm. Say
Yeah.
happy holidays,
Yeah.
but it's not
Yeah.
the norm for everyone.
Good
Okay.
It
point. Yeah.
still isn't.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to give one last example since we touched upon Mohammed and happy holidays. And by the
Mhm.
way, since it's Ramadan these
Mhm.
days, we're also recording this podcast in the time of Ramadan. There was this situation when I had a conversation with my client who wanted to hire me to bring in international speakers for their conference. They wanted to make
Mhm.
their local national event a bit more
Yeah.
international, and they wanted to rely on my network. And I suggested a couple of speakers from the Middle East. And they were like,
Okay.
well, I don't know, I'm not sure. And I was like, what makes you hesitate? Tell me more.
Mhm.
Like, don't be
Mhm.
afraid to sound weird or to confess your concerns. Be honest and transparent. This will also help us overcome your biases, etc. And he honestly said, like, I don't know. I really don't know why, but something is bothering me. So if we look at cultural stereotypes, then that would be something like, oh my God, this is Ramadan. It might be challenging to be working with the people from the Middle East these days. I don't know much about this, and I better not even diversify my
True.
panel by the Middle
Yeah. Yeah.
Easterners.
Yeah.
Let alone that Ramadan is not only celebrated in the Middle East, this is a whole different story. So, the ultimate conclusion that a culturally aware person could come up to here would be, okay, I know my speakers come from the Middle East. There is a high chance they may be Muslim. There is a high chance they may be celebrating Ramadan. What can I do in order to incorporate them and not be worried too much is, first of all, ask if they follow Ramadan limitations, or if they follow Ramadan at all, if they are believers. We can put the question in a more neutral, in a more nice fashion. But first of all, not
Mm.
make an assumption that every speaker from the Middle East will be limited by certain Ramadan
Mm. Good point. Yeah.
uh, points, yes,
Yeah.
expectations. Second, if they are, there is no problem for suggesting them, for instance, morning slots for a speech. Again, cultural awareness doesn't mean you automatically start stereotyping on people.
Mm.
Cultural awareness actually empowers you to be more flexible, even if you see your colleague or your partner is a subject to biases at some point.
Mm.
My big suggestion to everyone would be to accept the fact that both you and the people near you are subject to biases. And it doesn't mean we should be arguing and aggressively protecting the discriminated group straight away when we hear someone consciously or subconsciously discriminating. I would say an empathic, open, and kind dialogue is to my experience, a better key to success here. Because those who are not, I'm not sure I would quote that correctly, but I guess the biblical wisdom tells us, though who is not to be blamed shall throw a stone. So we are all here in the same boat. We are all
Mhm.
subject to biases. So in case you recognize something in the pattern of behaviors of the people around you, mm, I'd rather not jump with aggressive comments. I'd rather
Mhm.
you suggested in a kind and open fashion some of the culturally intelligent solutions.
Kristina, let's further dive into the practical tools and how to shift the mindset. And maybe let's talk about individuals first. And that's when I have, in this context, I have to mention your book, right? So you are the author of 50 Intercultural Questions. That's an interactive workbook to improve your cross-cultural communication skills. And it's a rather unique concept. It's a self-exploration workbook for all those who plan or who have already started working in a different culture, in a new country, a new region, or even in a new corporate structure as well, or
Yeah.
with people with different or of a different generation or religion and beyond. So your approach of this book is different. You do not provide like this ready-made instructions. If you go to China, do this and don't do that. But you rather equip the reader with intercultural sensitivity and to prepare the reader for unusual or maybe sometimes uncomfortable behavior, awkward situations in their intercultural journey. So, what are actually practical ways individuals can recognize? That's probably the first step, and then challenge their own biases.
Yeah. Oh, there are many,
Yeah.
plenty. And thank you for asking that because we can talk as long as we want about biases, but without practical steps to overcome them,
Mhm.
it is just it's just going to be a wonderful conversation, but we want some impact, right? So, what I wanted to say is, first off, thank you for sharing a few comments about my book. And I do believe that even before we start taking some action towards against biases in our own head or in the heads of the people around us, the step zero is to recognize ourselves. And
Mhm.
one of the signature exercises I'm doing with my clients when it comes to biases or cultural stereotypes is I ask them to think of 5 people they communicate most during their regular week. That could be their partners, they could be their parents, that could be their children, best friends. Doesn't matter if it's online or offline. Just the 5 closest people that you have the biggest trust with, the biggest flow of communications with. Usually it's 2 or 3 family members and 2 or 3 friends. And then I ask them to characterize these people through the categories that are usually subject to biases: gender, age, religion, ethnicity, nationality, languages they speak, etc., etc. Surprisingly, but not, most people find out that the closest people are exactly like they are.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
true.
And it's no surprise, again, our brain is wired this way.
Mhm.
And then I asked to do the same exercise with their closest colleagues that they collaborate with
Mhm.
in the closest fashion. And again, so many are surprised by the insight that even if I work in a very diverse team, I
Mhm.
have a tendency to mostly collaborate with the people who look like me, speak like me, follow the
Yeah.
same religion or whatever, whatever.
Yeah.
Just because, again, it's easier. The transactional costs of collaborating with somebody different than you are higher
Mhm.
than if you collaborate with someone just like you. So
Mhm.
there are plenty of exercises, but the main point that be my book or this drawing exercise is to first explore yourself. What was your
Mhm.
background? What are
Mhm.
your implicit associations with this or that groups? The
Mhm.
journaling can be very helpful, of course.
Yeah.
But then I would say there are plenty of exercises that can follow about after that, such as, for example, you can do the exercise called Veil of Ignorance, which is a fantastic tool that assumes you don't know anything about the person you are going to speak to, because
Okay.
they're covered under a veil.
Yeah.
So what if you don't know anything? What's their age? What's their gender? What's their
Mm-hmm.
religion?
Mm-hmm.
How would you answer their question or their proposal or their application if you were not to know
Okay.
anything? How would
Yeah.
you focus specifically on the merits, on the qualifications, et cetera, et
Mm-hmm.
cetera?
Mm-hmm.
Or let's say the exercise called flipping the script. It's
Mm-hmm.
when you have just answered somebody's email question or something.
Yeah.
What if you visually flip the person to
Okay.
somebody of, let's say, your own kind, the person who is very close to you or who is very similar to you? Would the answer be the same?
Mm-hmm.
Or were
Okay.
you influenced by some assumptions before you wrote this email, before you gave that answer? So if you
Mm-hmm.
visualize a person, how does that sound to you now? Or alternatively, what if you were to receive this answer? Would you feel comfortable? Do you think that you're not
Mm-hmm.
discriminating against someone?
Mm-hmm.
So there are tons of other exercises and examples. I will be happy to refer to some of my open sources that where I enlisted them so that our audience will be able to
Yes, please.
explore them
Mm-hmm.
for themselves.
Yeah, and maybe we can just touch quickly for leaders and organizations. Bias also shows up at a team and organizational level, right? So, what can leaders do to reduce bias in global teams, hiring, decision making? If you just have, a few examples for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, there is a whole bunch of exercises and activities I usually do with the recruiters, with the HR
Mm-hmm.
partners, and leaders when it comes to overcoming biases. But I'd say if we structure them into several pillars, the first one will be more unbiased recruitment process and onboarding process, starting from the visibility of the application and the openness to different applicants. And of course, structured interviews, certain methodologies that help you be less biased towards candidates. The second type of activities is what is happening on a regular basis in the team. Is there an opportunity for your team members to approach the leaders if they see they are being discriminated against? Is there any anonymous, clearly safe space, like a red bell or a red button, whatever you want to call it, somewhere where people would be able to approach without being laughed at or without being even further discriminated?
Yeah.
And point number three, it's what you're doing towards the future. Are you promoting awareness and knowledge about that explicitly? Not just assuming that everybody's treated equally, but are you actually having open conversations about that? Do you invite trainers and professionals who talk about this and do the practical exercises? Do you actually invite people to open up their perspectives? For example, the most basic things would be, do you do cultural nights, or do you welcome everyone to bring in their own social
Mm-hmm.
activity that they feel would be nice for the team building? So small,
Mm-hmm.
usually free things that don't request any additional
Yeah.
funding may be very helpful. But of course, it all starts with the openness of the minds of the leaders. If they think
Mm-hmm.
that we're doing just fine as we are, and it makes no sense to invest more time into the development of awareness around this topic, then maybe, well, it's their choice. But again, the bacteria on the teeth keep progressing unless brushed on a regular basis.
Kristina, wrapping it up, our wonderful conversation about biases. If listeners could take away one mindset shift from this conversation, what should it be? So, what do you want our audience to know and also to reflect upon after listening to this episode?
Would say be more gentle to yourself and to the people around you, because we're only human and we're all human, and it's completely natural that we all have our biases, and it's not to be ashamed to have biases. I think we might be ashamed to not working on them. So
Mm.
it's a never-ending process. Let's keep doing that consciously and actively. And I guess that's the only way we can improve and build a more open, diverse, and kind society.
Oh, thank you,
Perfect.
Kristina. And
Yeah.
also for our listeners, we will add it to our show notes. Where can they reach out to you and find out more about you, about more about the topic on your website or on LinkedIn? If you could just share for our listeners this as well, please.
Absolutely. Well, available anywhere you mentioned on the website, on LinkedIn, and on YouTube as well. So feel free to reach out and ask any questions or maybe argue with me if some of the examples didn't resonate with you. I'm all for listening to new perspectives. And of course, the book is something that I hope will be very valuable to the readers. And I'm looking forward to hearing your comments about this workbook where you can do self-reflections and get some tips and recommendations on the intercultural workspace and intercultural life.
Fantastic.
Well, thank
Thank
you so much
you.
for being our guest today.